They thought he was just the janitor. They laughed when he was called onto the training mat. Some even pulled out their phones to record the humiliation. But what they didn't know was that this quiet, single father had once walked through fire, and the man mocking him had just lit a match. This isn't just a story about a fight. It's about dignity, redemption, and how one man's silence spoke louder than a war hero's pride. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Hey, janitor, you missed a spot, right under my boots. The voice cut through the morning silence like a dull blade. Beau McAllister didn't look up. He pressed the mop forward, his movements steady, unhurried. The gym floor beneath his boots gleamed under the fluorescent lights of Echo Creek Military Base's combat training facility. Behind him, a cluster of young recruits snickered. "Careful," one whispered, "might trigger the war hero with a mop." Another laughed. "Bet he cries over spilled coffee, too." Beau said nothing. His silence was neither weakness nor defeat. It was ritual. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. He was here for the paycheck, the routine, and for the quiet hours before the chaos of drills and shouting took over. But today wasn't like other days. A new voice entered the room, crisp and sharp as frostbite. "Well, isn't this precious?" The mop man's leading the morning shift. Everyone snapped to attention as Colonel Dana Voss strode in, her combat boots clapping against the floor with theatrical confidence. Her name preceded her: 2 silver stars, a viral military influencer, and a reputation built on breaking spirits as much as records. Beau straightened up slowly, wringing out the mop into the bucket without a word. Voss crossed her arms. "Tell me, who thought it was a good idea to let the janitor in the training bay during active hours? This isn't a daycare." "Colonel Voss," came a calm voice from the corner. Riley Morgan, a young hussy with a reputation for level-headedness, stood at attention. "Mr. McAllister has clearance. He always works the early shift." Voss tilted her head toward Riley, eyes narrowing. "And you are?" "Hussy Morgan, ma'am." Voss smirked. "You defending the cleaning crew now, Morgan. Planning to join them once you flunk out of hand-to-hand." Riley clenched her jaw, but said nothing. Beau continued to mop near the edge of the room, unbothered on the surface. But if one looked closely, his hand had paused for half a second longer than usual. Voss turned back to Beau. "You know what bothers me most? Not that you're here, not that you're cleaning this floor like your life depends on it. What bothers me is that you walk around like you belong, like this is your battlefield." Beau finally looked up, just long enough to meet her gaze. His eyes, calm and unreadable, said nothing, but the room fell silent. Voss scoffed. "Right. Nothing to say. Fitting. Silence is the last refuge of the irrelevant." A few of the younger soldiers chuckled again, nervously this time. Riley stepped forward. "Ma'am, with respect, Mr. McAllister isn't interfering. Enough." Voss raised her hand. "I don't run a charity, Morgan. This base runs on discipline and performance, not pity for silent men with brooms." Then Beau placed the mop against the wall, wrung out the last drop, and reached for his gloves. Not combat gloves. Vinyl, for cleaning. He walked toward the door, passing Voss with quiet composure. She followed him with her eyes, irritated by his lack of reaction. "Do you know what separates a soldier from a civilian, Mr. McAllister?" she called after him. He stopped, but didn't turn. "A soldier faces the enemy head-on. A civilian wipes the blood afterward." Beau paused. Then, after a long beat, he said something no one expected. "In my experience," he said, voice low, even, "the loudest voices in the room usually weren't there when it counted." Then he walked out. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was thick, heavy, like the air after a failed joke. Voss smiled stiffly, masking whatever flicker crossed her face. "Humor," she said dryly. "Cute." But Riley wasn't smiling. An hour later, Voss posted a short clip to her social media, a sweeping pan of the training room, captioned, "Starting the day strong. Some folks just clean up after greatness." Within 20 minutes, the video had already reached 8,000 likes and a dozen sarcastic comments. One read, "Bet that janitor couldn't throw a punch if his mop depended on it." Riley sat in the corner of the mess hall, watching the likes rise. She had heard stories, rumors, whispers. A man who never spoke about his past, who showed up rain or shine, who once caught a runaway trainee falling off the pull-up rig with reflexes no janitor should have had. Most thought he was just lucky, but Riley had been watching longer than most. And what she saw, how Bo moved, how he listened, how he reacted, was not luck. It was control. Precise, deliberate control. She pulled out her tablet and opened the base personnel files. His name came up, but there was almost nothing. No military service record. No background prior to the janitorial contract. Just a note. Background verified through secure channel. She frowned. Back in the gym, Voss addressed her squad. "Listen up," she barked. "We have a live combat exercise Saturday. I expect full performance, no excuses, especially from those who think compassion outranks competence." Her eyes flicked toward Riley. Riley stood. "Ma'am, permission to ask a question." Voss raised a brow. "Bold today, aren't we? If someone disrespects your rank but hasn't broken protocol, what's the best way to correct them?" Voss smirked. "You embarrass them in front of everyone. That's how you train dogs and men alike." The squad laughed nervously again, but Riley just nodded and replied quietly, "Noted." Later that night, Riley passed by the storage shed near the south fence. Through a slit in the siding, she caught sight of something that stopped her cold. Bo McAllister, alone, in full motion. Shadow boxing in the moonlight, no wasted movement, no flourish. Just cold, efficient rhythm, like a soldier who hadn't forgotten a single drill. She leaned in, heart thudding, and she knew then, with absolute clarity, that mop was just a disguise, and the man behind it, he was anything but irrelevant. By midday, the video had made its rounds through the base like wildfire. "We let janitors train now. God bless America." The caption, paired with Colonel Voss's smirk and Bo's silhouette in the background, turned him into a joke overnight. The clip wasn't on public platforms, yet, but on the base's internal message boards, it had become a trending thread titled, "Operation Mop Top." Most laughed. A few didn't. Riley Morgan sat stiff-backed at the corner table in the mess hall, untouched tray of food in front of her. She scrolled through the comments silently, jaw tight. The younger recruits nearby whispered just loud enough. "Think he'll show up tomorrow. Maybe he'll mop the parking lot next. Got to give the colonel a proper stage." Laughter followed. Riley stood without a word and left, down a quiet hallway lined with framed photos of past commanding officers. Riley paused in front of the last one. Colonel Henry McAllister. A name she hadn't connected before, no visible relation. But something about the expression, stoic, weathered, reminded her of the man with the mop. She shook the thought. Coincidences didn't mean truth. She headed outside, toward the small utility trailer where janitorial supplies were kept. She found Bo there, crouched next to a rusted bucket, adjusting the latch on the cleaning cot. His sleeves were rolled up. His silence, as always, filled the space more than words could. "I saw the video," Riley said. Bo didn't look up. "A lot of people did." "You don't care." He stood slowly, not defensive, just calm. "It's not the first time someone's laughed at me, Morgan, and it won't be the last." "But she humiliated you," Riley pressed. "Publicly, mocked your work, your presence, your worth," and Bo wiped his hands on a rag, then finally looked at her. "What I do isn't who I am, and what she said isn't what I carry." Riley felt her throat tighten. "Still, you didn't deserve it." He tilted his head, as if weighing her words. Then, with a quiet gravity, replied, "Neither did my wife. But life doesn't hand out fairness. It hands out chances to choose who you want to be, no matter what the world sees." The words hung between them. Riley blinked, trying to steady herself. "You lost her." Bo nodded once. "Cancer, while I was deployed." One message got delayed. By the time I read it, the funeral was over. Riley whispered, "I'm sorry." "So was I." He turned back to the cleaning cart. "Now I clean places I once trained in. It keeps me close to what I left behind, but far enough not to burn." Riley stood still for a moment, watching the man whose dignity didn't need defending, because it was woven into every movement, every silence. Then she said quietly, "They don't deserve to laugh." Bo's voice was low. "Let them. Their laughter says more about them than it does about me." That evening, Colonel Dana Voss hosted an open-air briefing for her hand-to-hand combat unit, complete with energy bars, sponsor banners, and a camera crew prepping footage for one of her motivational clips. She stood on the makeshift stage like she was born for it. "All right, soldiers," she called. "This weekend, we'll be hosting a friendly combat exhibition, open to base personnel. Fun, clean, morale-boosting stuff." Someone in the back raised a hand. "You fighting, ma'am?" Voss grinned. "I might. Depends on the challenge." Another chimed in. "Why not fight the janitor? Make it interesting." Laughter erupted. Voss let it build before holding up a hand. "You know what?" she said, eyes gleaming. "Why not? If our mop master thinks he can last 3 minutes with me, I'll let him prove it." The crowd roared. Riley, standing at the edge of the circle, stepped forward. "That's not a fair match, Colonel." Voss turned. "Excuse me?" "He's not a soldier. He didn't ask for this." "No," Voss said smoothly. "He didn't. But he walked onto my mat, in my house, looking like he belonged. So maybe it's time we find out if that quiet of his hides anything worth hearing." "You just want to humiliate him," Riley said evenly. Voss walked forward, slowly, deliberately, until she was eye to eye with the young soldier. "Let me give you a tip, Morgan. The world doesn't hand out fairness. It hands out winners and excuses." Then, with a smirk, she added, "You defending the janitor, or hoping to join the cleaning crew?" Before Riley could answer, a voice interrupted from behind. "If I accept," Bo said, stepping into the light, "will you stop talking long enough to listen?" The crowd went silent. Voss turned, eyebrows raised. "Well, well, the man speaks." Bo's gaze was calm, steady. 3 minutes. No cameras, no crowds, just the mat. "No deal," Voss replied. "You want a mop in my house, you do it by my rules. Saturday morning. Full audience." He studied her for a long moment. Then, simply said, "Fine," and turned to leave. "But if I last," he added, glancing back once, "you'll do more than shut up. You'll remember." "Remember what?" she asked, amused. "That not everyone who sweeps floors is beneath you," As Beau walked off into the dusk, the whispers started again. But this time, they didn't all sound like mockery. Some carried awe, others doubt. And one voice, Riley's, followed after him silently in her thoughts. He didn't fight back because he was afraid. He waited because he knew. And something told her. Saturday morning wouldn't go the way Voss planned. The news spread faster than any official memo. Colonel Voss to spar with the janitor this Saturday. No one said his name. They didn't have to. Everyone on base knew who the janitor was now. By Friday morning, the walls of Echo Creek's training facility buzzed with tension and rumor. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others, particularly the seasoned soldiers, weren't laughing at all. Because something about Beau McAllister didn't add up. 3 minutes, full audience, no headgear, just a little fun. Voss's voice echoed through the mess hall as she spoke with 2 young camera operators prepping for her content reel. "You really think he'll show?" one asked. "Oh, he'll show," she said, biting into an apple like it was already over. "These quiet types always do. It's the only time they get to feel noticed." That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She paced the barracks hallway, the faint hum of the vending machine, the only sound. Her thoughts spun. The last time she'd seen someone that composed before a fight, it had been her brother, on the day he left for deployment and never returned. It wasn't confidence, it was clarity. Beau McAllister moved like a man who knew exactly what he was capable of and chose not to show it. But now, he was stepping into a ring with a woman whose punches had shattered jaws and egos alike, and everyone would be watching, Saturday. 8 a.m. sharp. The facility gym had never seen a crowd this size. Uniforms filled the bleachers. Even a few high-ranking officers showed up, murmuring behind folded arms. Riley stood near the edge of the mat, heart thudding, arms crossed tightly. Her eyes locked on Beau as he entered, not in any uniform, but in the same worn grey t-shirt and cargo pants he always cleaned in. No gloves, no swagger, just that silent stillness, like still water before a storm. Voss entered to applause. She wore sleek combat leggings, branded gloves, and a faint smirk. A camera crew followed her steps. One of the techs whispered, "Stream is live." Another handed her a mic. "This morning," Voss said, turning to the crowd, "we're going to settle a very important question. What happens when you mistake silence for strength?" She turned toward Beau. 3 minutes. All in good fun. He nodded once. "That's what they always say before a war starts." Her smile twitched. The bell rang. Voss struck first. A jab, fast and calculated, cut through the air. Beau dodged with a subtle pivot, hand still low. No counterattack. Another jab. Another dodge. Beau's footwork was quiet, precise, controlled like breathing. The crowd murmured. Riley's eyes narrowed. Voss circled, now annoyed. "Come on, show me you're awake." Still, no strike from Beau. Just evasions so clean they bordered on elegant. "You think you're proving something," she hissed. "You think I'm here to fight." Beau's voice was calm, unreadable. "I'm here to remember." "To remember what?" He smiled softly. "Why I stopped fighting in the first place." 30 seconds in, Voss launched a roundhouse kick. Textbook form, maximum impact. Beau stepped aside like wind passing through an open door. The kick missed by inches. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the camera crew froze. Voss gritted her teeth. "Stop dancing." "I'm not dancing," he said. "I'm waiting." "For what?" "For you to figure out this isn't about you." By the end of the first minute, sweat had formed on Voss's brow. Beau hadn't thrown a single punch. And yet, he owned the room. Riley leaned toward the commanding officer next to her. "Sir, with respect, why isn't he retaliating?" The officer, a grizzled veteran with 3 tours under his belt, didn't look away from the mat. "Because he's not fighting her," he said. "He's fighting something much bigger." Minute 2 began. Voss charged. A flurry of punches, hooks, elbows. Bo blocked them without flinching. Still, no return strikes. The crowd shifted from excitement to unease. This was supposed to be a joke. Someone whispered. But it wasn't funny anymore, and that's when she snapped. "You think you're better than me?" Voss growled, voice cracking. "You think walking around here in silence makes you superior?" Bo finally stopped moving, looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't think I'm better." She hesitated. "I think," he continued, "you're terrified that someone without medals, without cameras, without a uniform, might still be more respected than you." The crowd froze. Even the camera operator's hand dropped. Voss lunged with a frustrated scream. And that's when it happened. A single movement, swift, surgical, final. Bo stepped in, not to strike, but to deflect. He caught her wrist, shifted her weight, and let her momentum carry her. In one clean motion, she tumbled to the mat. Hard. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in silence. Bo stepped back, hand still low. Voss lay stunned, her pride bruised far more than her body. He looked at her, not with gloating, but with something softer. Pity? No. Understanding. "I told you," he said gently. "I wasn't here to fight. I was here to remind you." "Remind me of what?" she croaked, sitting up. "That dignity doesn't come from power," he said. "It comes from restraint." Riley stepped forward, unable to stop the tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't the spectacle that moved her. It was the truth behind it. Bo wasn't a hero in the conventional sense. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to heal something broken. In her. In them. Maybe even in himself. The bell rang. Match over. No knockout. No scorecards. Just a man who refused to strike. And in doing so, silenced the entire base. The gym had never been so quiet. Not after a fight. Not like this. People didn't leave immediately. They lingered. Some sat in stunned silence. Others stared at Bo as he walked off the mat. No victory lap. No fist in the air. No words. Just the same steady stride, as if he'd finished mopping the floor and was on his way to clean the next one. Colonel Voss remained on the mat, seated upright, her eyes distant, jaw locked. Sweat mixed with disbelief on her face. She didn't look hurt, at least not physically, but something inside her had cracked, and everyone could feel it. No one clapped. No one cheered. Because this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something else. Outside, the late morning sun lit the concrete walkways with blinding brilliance. Bo moved toward the utility shed with his usual pace. But today, Riley followed him. This time, she didn't hesitate. "You didn't just beat her," she said behind him. "You dismantled everything she hides behind." He stopped, turned halfway, just enough to meet her eyes. "I didn't want to," he said softly, "but you had to." He gave the faintest nod. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Riley asked the question that had haunted her since the first day she watched him move like no janitor ever should. "Who are you, Bo?" He looked at her for a long beat, as if deciding how much of the past he was willing to reopen. Finally, he gestured toward the storage unit behind the shed. "Come with me." The storage space was dark, dusty, and filled with boxes, worn mats, and old gear. In the corner, beneath a grey top, Beau uncovered a small wooden trunk. He flipped the latch and opened it. Inside were things no janitor would own. A folded military flag, a pair of broken dog tags, a faded photograph of a woman holding a baby, and beneath it all, a laminated citation for the Silver Star, unsigned. Riley knelt beside him. Her eyes scanned the document. Beau McAllister, Special Operations Group, Operation Fallen Breath. She stopped. This mission was classified. He nodded. Still is. Then why show me this? Because you asked who I am. And Beau lifted the photograph. I was a ghost. The kind they send in when things go so wrong, no one wants to admit it happened. He sat back on an old bench, the weight of memory settling in. My wife's name was Claire. She used to beg me to leave the military, said I was losing pieces of myself I'd never get back. I told her I was holding the line, protecting the country, doing the honorable thing. He laughed bitterly. But honor doesn't hold your daughter when you're not home to say goodbye. Riley felt her chest tighten. She died while you were deployed? Stage 4 lymphoma. I was in the middle of a silent op in eastern Syria. Message never reached me in time. He exhaled, slow and heavy. I came back to an empty house. A 5-year-old who barely recognized me. A flag folded on the porch, and a chest full of medals I couldn't look at without shaking. Riley sat beside him. So you walked away? No, I disappeared. He paused. Joined a civilian contract. Maintenance. Cleaning. Kept moving base to base. Changed my name on paperwork. Took jobs no one noticed. The world needed noise. I needed quiet. Until her. He looked at her, brow raised. Voss, Riley clarified. She pulled you back into the noise. Beau's eyes softened. She reminded me what silence costs when people use it to bury others. There was another pause. Then Riley asked, why didn't you fight back sooner? Beau's answer came like a whisper of truth. Because I didn't come here to prove who I was. I came here to protect who I've become. Riley didn't say anything for a while. She stared at the box, at the medals, at the dog tags with the crack down the middle. Then she looked at Beau. Really looked at him. Not as a janitor. Not even as a ghost soldier. But as a man. Flawed, scarred, and still standing. I used to think strength was about how loud you could be, she said. How hard you could hit. But watching you today, it made me realize something. He waited. Real strength is when you can hit, but choose not to, and still leave the room in silence. Beau smiled faintly. I used to think that too, he said. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from her uniform. There's going to be fallout. From today. He nodded. I know. They'll come asking questions, wanting statements, maybe even an apology. They'll get neither. She grinned. You're kind of a legend now, you know. I'm still just a janitor, he replied. Riley stepped toward the door, then paused. Not to me. She hesitated, then added, and not to anyone who was paying attention. As she walked out into the sunlight, her mind raced with everything she'd just heard, seen and felt. The medals, the silence, the pain, the restraint. Inside the shed, Beau remained seated beside the box of memories, the sun cutting through the window in a single golden beam. He reached for the photograph again. His thumb brushed across Claire's smile, and softly, almost inaudibly, he whispered, still holding the line. The line wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was integrity. It was dignity. And today, it had been heard without a single shout. Saturday had given the base a storm. Sunday gave it an aftershock. By Monday morning, the video of the match had leaked. First on a closed base Discord server, then across anonymous military forums, and finally, it jumped the fence. Within hours, it was everywhere. No punches, no knockouts, just a man in a janitor's shirt not fighting, and somehow winning anyway. The silence in that gym was now echoing across phones, laptops, and late-night news tickers. Single dad janitor silences decorated colonel in viral sparring match. The man who won without throwing a punch. The headlines were faster than truth. And truth was getting harder to ignore. Colonel Dana Voss sat in her private office, fingers clenched around a cold coffee cup. The blinds were shut, the room dim. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the match, not even to the camera crew, who had tried to spin the video before it went viral. Too late, too big. And the worst part wasn't the comments. It was the silence from command. No backing, no statement, no rescue. Just a growing storm that she, for once, couldn't outbox. A knock at her door. "Go away," she muttered. Another knock. Then the door creaked open anyway. It was Lieutenant Anders, her second in command. Young, sharp, loyal, and visibly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "you've been asked to report to base command at 00900. She didn't answer. He continued, "They want to review the footage and discuss your conduct." Voss let out a bitter chuckle. "So this is what it looks like when a mop breaks a rank." Anders shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, Colonel, that mop never even touched you." Her eyes snapped to him. He swallowed, but didn't flinch. "It wasn't what he did, ma'am. It's what you didn't see coming." Voss said nothing. Only the faint hum of the air vent filled the silence. Meanwhile, at the far edge of the base near the supply quarters, Bo pushed open the door to the break room. A few soldiers were gathered inside, normally chatty, always territorial. This morning they stood when he entered, not stiff, not forced, but out of something quieter. Respect. One of the younger privates, a hotshot kid with a buzz cut and a reputation for mouth over muscle, walked up to him. Hesitant. "Mr. McAllister, sir. I mean, not sir, but..." Bo raised an eyebrow. The kid blushed. "I just wanted to say, sorry. For the jokes. For the stuff we said before." Bo looked at him a moment, then nodded. "That's not mine to carry any more." The kid looked confused. Bo offered a gentle explanation. "When someone throws dirt at you, you can catch it, or let it fall. Either way, it never sticks if you don't reach for it." That line, simple, clean, sank into the room like rain on dry earth. The kid whispered, "Yes, sir," and stepped back. Bo poured his coffee and sat at the corner table, just as he always did. But everything had changed. Outside, Riley stood by the railing near the main quad, watching two officers in there argue about paperwork. The wind picked up. Autumn was settling in, a crispness in the air that always reminded her of beginnings. And endings. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. "Bo, I thought you hated attention," she said. He shrugged. "I do." She gestured to the group of enlisted men watching him from afar. "You've got more followers than the base newsletter." He gave a dry smile. "Fame's just noise with a spotlight. It fades." She looked at him. "And dignity?" He met her gaze. "Dignity walks home in the dark and doesn't need anyone to clap." They stood together a moment, the wind pulling at Riley's bun and Bo's sleeves. Then she asked softly, "Why now? Why accept the match?" He looked away, toward the training bay, where it had all unfolded. Because there's a moment in every storm, he said, when you realize silence isn't peace anymore, it's surrender. She stared at him. And I've surrendered enough in this lifetime, he added. Riley swallowed hard. I wish I'd met you sooner, she said. Beau turned to her, his voice like gravel wrapped in warmth. No, you met me exactly when you needed to. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Voss walked across the base parade ground alone. The people she passed didn't salute. They didn't mock, either. They simply moved aside. Because even arrogance, when shattered, leaves behind an echo. She reached the flagpole where Beau stood, fixing the rigging line that had been tangled by wind. She didn't speak at first. He didn't look at her. You humiliated me, she finally said. No, he replied, still focused on the rope. I reminded you. Of what? He looked at her then, not with triumph, but with truth. That the rank doesn't make the respect. The respect makes the rank. Voss blinked, and for the first time, she had no comeback. Beau handed her the flagpole rope. It still flies either way. She took it silently, and in that moment, something between them settled, not as forgiveness, not yet, but as recognition. Two soldiers, two pasts, one truth. That real power doesn't yell, it stands still while the world watches, and doesn't flinch. And somewhere in the quiet of that autumn evening, Beau McAllister, former ghost, full-time janitor, became the loudest man on base. Without saying another word, by Tuesday morning, the base cafeteria felt like a chapel after a storm. Quiet, reverent, filled with people pretending not to talk about what everyone was still thinking about. Beau McAllister sat alone at his usual corner table, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup, the steam curling around his steady hands. The tray before him was empty, save for a neatly folded napkin and a small drawing his daughter had tucked into his lunch the day before. A stick figure holding a mop, smiling beside a taller stick figure with stars around her head. At the top, written in crayon, Daddy wins. Across the room, Riley Morgan watched him. Not like someone studying a mystery anymore, but like someone protecting a quiet truth, one that the rest of the base was only beginning to understand. She stood, made her way over, and slid into the seat across from him. Beau looked up, said nothing. Riley spoke softly. They're rewriting the after-action reports. They don't know how to classify what happened Saturday. Beau stirred his coffee. Good. Maybe it'll teach them that not everything needs a label. She leaned forward. They're calling it a non-standard personnel conflict resolution demonstration. Beau raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of words for something that took 3 minutes and no fists. Riley grinned. Government needs vocabulary when it runs out of courage. He chuckled, and for the first time it wasn't bitter. It was light. She looked down at the drawing. Your daughter? He nodded. Lila, 7, thinks I'm Superman with a mop. She's not wrong. Beau's face softened. I used to be a man who broke doors. Now I fix hinges. And somehow she respects the second more. Riley leaned back, folding her arms. Maybe because breaking is easy. Holding something together takes patience and love. He looked at her, really looked, and in that pause, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. A shared silence, a shared weight. You know, she said after a moment, before you, I thought restraint was weakness. Beau shook his head gently. Restraint is just strength that's grown wise enough to know when not to use itself. That line, it hit her harder than any training ever had. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, slid it across the table. "What's this?" Beau asked. "The original footage of the match, unedited, from my cam, before the media teams touched it." He frowned. "Why give it to me?" "Because people deserve to see the truth. Not just the moment you floored her, but the minute before, when you chose not to." Beau stared at the small drive, then back at her. "You're risking your neck." She shrugged. "Some truths are worth it." He didn't take it right away, just looked at it, as if holding it would mean re-entering a world he left behind. "I don't want a spotlight," he said. "You won't get one," she replied. "You'll get a mirror, and maybe someone else who needed it." Beau sighed. "Sometimes mirrors show things we've tried hard to forget." "Yeah," Riley said quietly. "But sometimes they remind us we're still here, and still human." That afternoon, the atmosphere at the base gym shifted. No cameras, no announcements. But soldiers came in quietly, in 2s and 3s. Some to train. Most just to be there. Because now, the floor where Beau had stood wasn't just a mat. It was something else. A reminder that the strongest person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to prove it. At 4 p.m., Colonel Voss walked through the doors, alone. No sunglasses. No cameras. No entourage. Just the sound of her own footsteps echoing in a place that used to belong to her presence. She stepped onto the mat. A few heads turned. Most froze. She looked around, then said loudly and clearly, "Is he here?" Beau stepped from the shadows of the side wall. No drama. Just there. Voss turned toward him. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "I didn't think you would." She took a breath. "I came to ask a question." Beau waited. "What did you see in me that day that made you step back instead of forward?" His answer was immediate. "I saw a soldier who'd forgotten she was human before she was ever uniform." Her eyes dropped. "I saw myself," he added more gently. "Years ago. Before I broke. Before I learned that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means listening." Voss stood in silence for a long moment. Then, finally, she said, "I've been loud for so long, I forgot what listening even sounds like." Beau nodded. "It sounds like stillness, and it feels like peace." She looked at him, and in that instant, she wasn't a decorated officer or a viral face. She was just a woman who had gotten lost in the echo of her own ambition. "You're not just a janitor," she whispered. "And you're not just a war hero," Beau replied. "We're both something more, if we let ourselves be." She gave the faintest nod, then, quietly, turned and walked away. Riley watched from the corner, breath caught in her chest. When Beau turned to leave, she walked beside him. "No one will believe that happened." "They don't have to," he said. "The people who needed to hear it were already in the room." She glanced at him sideways. "You always talk like your words are the last line of a poem." He smiled. "Because silence is the rest of the story." And this time, she didn't respond. She just walked with him, and let that silence tell her everything. The following morning, an email quietly arrived in inboxes across the base. Subject: Internal review. Initiated: Conduct and Command. Ethics: Lieutenant Coroner Dana Voss. No fanfare. No explanation. Just 6 lines of administrative language. But to those who had witnessed the sparring match, it was more than enough. By noon, the rumors were no longer whispers. They were statements, soft, sharp, and spreading. "Command's not happy." Someone forwarded the full footage. "Turns out silence is louder than we thought." In her quarters, Voss sat motionless, facing the wall. Her decorations and awards, once neatly arranged, were now stacked in a box on the floor. The wall was bare, the space stripped of identity, like a chapter being erased before it could end on its own terms. Her phone buzzed. One new text, from an unknown number. It's not too late to listen. RM. She stared at it, then put the phone down, unread. Meanwhile, back in the main hallway of administration, Riley stood in front of a bulletin board that had once held sign-up sheets, training schedules, and weekend events. Now, it held something else. A handwritten quote, tacked right in the center. Strength isn't the power to strike. Strength is knowing when not to. Unknown. But everyone knew who had said it. She turned to find Beau approaching, paperwork in one hand, toolbox in the other. "You starting a revolution with post-it notes now?" he asked, half amused. She smirked. "Only the quiet ones." He nodded at the quote. "That line wasn't mine." "No, it was my daughter's, after I lost my temper fixing a broken chair." Riley's eyebrows rose. "Seriously?" She was 5, looked at me and said, "Daddy, maybe the chair wouldn't break if you stopped yelling at it." They both laughed, and then Riley said, more seriously, "They're asking for your statement, official one, for the review board." Beau shook his head. "I'm not giving them anything." "You should." "Why?" "Because silence changed the room once. This time, the right words could change the system." Beau looked down at the wrench in his hand, then slowly back at her. "You trust them to listen?" "No," she said, "but I trust the people reading the report after them." He considered that, then handed her the folded form. "You write it." "Me?" "You saw the whole thing, and you hear things even when I don't say them." She blinked. "That's a lot of trust." He gave her a half smile. "You're one of the few people I've ever met who doesn't need to talk to be understood." Riley held the form gently, like something fragile. "All right," she said, "but I'm putting that chair story in." "Then I want creative credit." That afternoon, Voss was summoned to the command building. She walked alone. No gear, no rank on her shoulders. Just a woman stepping into a room she no longer controlled. Inside, 3 senior officers sat behind a simple table. The mood was firm, but not aggressive. Serious, but not vengeful. They handed her a folder. Inside, her career summary, the footage, and a single-page letter titled, "Character Witness Statement, McAllister, B." She read the first paragraph in silence, then the second, then the final lines. Riley had written them with clarity, but also grace. He didn't come here to defeat anyone. He came here to remind us that in a world full of voices, dignity is what we hear when someone chooses not to shout. For the first time in years, Dana Voss felt something slip in her chest. Not pride, not anger. Something softer. Something like regret. Outside, Riley waited on the steps, arms crossed, watching clouds gather over the ridgeline. When Voss exited the building, she didn't say anything. She just stopped beside Riley and stared into the same sky. "You wrote that statement," Voss said at last. "I did." "Why?" "Because I didn't want your story to end in bitterness." Voss turned to her. "You think I deserve that kind of grace?" Riley answered without hesitation. "I don't think grace is about what we deserve. I think it's about what we choose to carry forward." Voss was quiet. Then, after a long pause, "You're a better soldier than I ever was." "No," Riley said gently, "just one that had the right teacher." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the mountains, Beau sat alone on a bench outside the barracks. No mop, no toolbox, just the drawing from Lila, folded neatly in his lap. He looked out toward the horizon, where the light faded slowly, leaving behind a golden hush. Riley joined him without a word. She sat, her shoulder brushing his for the first time. Neither spoke for a while. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The noise, the mission, the war?" Bo looked at her, then back at the horizon. "Sometimes," he said, "but not like before." "What changed?" He smiled faintly. "Now, the mission is smaller, quieter, but it lasts longer." She rested her head lightly on his shoulder, and as the last light dipped below the edge of the world, they sat in silence. Not because they had nothing left to say, but because some stories are best felt, not spoken. The following week felt like the pause between heartbeats. No drills barked from loudspeakers, no selfies from Voss's page, no laughter echoing from locker rooms at Bo's expense, only the quiet rebuilding of a base and of its people. But some stories, no matter how quietly lived, refused to stay silent forever. It started with a single comment on a private veterans forum. "Who is this janitor? His footwork looked like Delta. The restraint, that's not amateur instinct." Then a second post, this time with a blurry screenshot from the video. "That's not how civilians move. That's someone trained to disappear." Within 48 hours, whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into searches. And someone, somewhere, connected the dots. A man named Bo McAllister had once served under a different name. Decorated, disavowed, erased. Now, quietly cleaning floors at Echo Creek. The government hadn't outed him. The internet had. Bo sat in the maintenance bay late Thursday afternoon, working on a busted heater unit. His sleeves were rolled up, hands dusted with rust and time. Riley entered, tablet in hand, a line between her brows. "You're trending," she said. He didn't look up. "I don't trend. I fix boilers." "Well, this boiler is now a national mystery. Military blogs, Reddit threads, even a podcast called Silence and Steel did an episode on you." Bo sighed and leaned back. "I liked it better when I was just the guy who refilled the paper towels." She held up the tablet. "They know who you were." He finally met her eyes. There wasn't panic, just weariness. "Then they'll try to decide who I am. Again." Riley sat down on a nearby crate, eyes gentle. "Maybe it's time you let them hear it from you." "I spent years unlearning how to speak that language," he said. "War, legacy, identity. Now they want me to turn it back on for what? Closure?" "No," Riley said. "Not for closure. For context." When Bo was quiet a long time, then asked, "You ever feel like your past is a book you stopped reading because you didn't like who you were becoming?" Riley nodded. "Every day." He glanced away. "Then you know what it costs to reopen it." "But maybe," she said softly, "that story wasn't over. Maybe you just needed to write the rest of it differently." That night, the base commander summoned Bo to his office. Not an order, just an invitation. Inside, Colonel James Everett, a career officer with eyes like worn steel, sat behind his desk, flipping through a folder. He didn't stand, just gestured to the chair. Bo sat. Everett closed the file. "You don't have to speak. I know you prefer quiet. So, I'll do the talking." Bo said nothing. Everett continued. "I've read the reports, watched the footage, heard from soldiers I trust. And the truth is, what happened in that gym wasn't just about Voss. It was about all of us. Our blind spots, our arrogance, our addiction to volume." He leaned forward. "And then you walked in, with a mop. and somehow reminded us what valor looks like when it stops trying to be seen. Beau's gaze didn't flinch. "What do you want from me, sir?" "A choice," Everett said. "I can clear your record, restore your name, even offer you a position, not as a janitor, as an instructor, mentor, a quiet leader," and Beau blinked. Everett added, "Or you can go back to cleaning rooms, fixing faucets, being anonymous." Beau leaned back in his chair. The silence stretched, thick, thoughtful. Then he said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. I've cleaned the same hallway every morning for the past 2 years, and every time I do, I pass a photo of a man in uniform. He looks proud, confident, respected." Everett nodded. "That's Colonel Henry McAllister. He's you, isn't he?" Beau smiled faintly. "He was. Once." Everett waited. Beau continued. "But the truth is, I'm not that man anymore, and I don't want to be, because he missed too many moments trying to prove something to people who never really cared." He stood. "So no, I don't want the uniform back. I don't want the title. What I want, what I choose, is to live in a world where my daughter grows up knowing that dignity isn't a decoration. It's a decision." Everett sat back and nodded. "That's the best answer I never saw coming." The next day, the base newsletter went out. Buried on page 2, below a headline about equipment updates, was a short blurb. "McAllister declines recognition, cites integrity over title." Some men fight to be remembered. Others live to remember what matters. No fanfare. Just truth. That evening, as the sun lowered and the shadows stretched long over the quad, Riley found Beau kneeling beside a faulty water valve near the barracks. She handed him a bottle of sweet tea and sat beside him. "They offered you the kingdom, didn't they?" she asked. He nodded, sipping slowly. "And you turned it down." "I didn't come here to wear a crown," he said. "I came here to fix what I broke in myself." Riley looked at him, her voice quieter now. "You know, I used to think people like you only existed in war movies. Then you showed up with a wrench and a heart like stone, and changed everything I thought I knew about strength." He smiled. "Stone can't bend, but wood weathers. It holds. And hearts, they learn, if they're lucky." She leaned closer, just slightly. "You think you've learned enough?" He met her eyes. "I'm still sweeping pieces." Riley reached for his hand, calloused and worn. She held it gently. "Then let's keep sweeping," she whispered, "together." And in the hush of that moment, beneath a sky turning gold and blue, 2 lives once fractured by war, loss, and silence began to rebuild. Something softer, something stronger, something real. The wind carried the first breath of winter through Echo Creek. Leaves scraped across the parade ground like forgotten letters. Soldiers moved about in tighter jackets, faster steps. But somehow, despite the cold, the base felt warmer than it had in months. Something unseen had shifted. It wasn't policy. It wasn't protocol. It was perspective. And it had started with a mop, and a man who didn't raise his voice to be heard. Inside the training facility, a new tradition had quietly begun. At the far corner of the gym, a corkboard labeled Legacy Wall had appeared. No one officially announced it. No one claimed it. It simply started growing. Pinned on the board were snapshots, notes, handwritten reflections, a photo of Beau mid-step on the mat, eyes calm as the world watched him. A note from a young recruit. "He taught me that strength doesn't have to bruise to be real." A drawing from a child, Lila's crayon masterpiece, framed by someone who had found it in the trash and knew better than to let it go. Every day, More pieces were added. No rank, no signatures, just stories. That afternoon, Riley entered the mess hall and found Beau exactly where she expected him. Corner table, worn mug in hand, quietly reading a repair manual like it was poetry. "You know you've got a fan club now, right?" she said, dropping into the seat across from him. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Only club I ever wanted was the one that serves black coffee and doesn't talk too loud." "Too late," she smirked. "There's talk of naming the maintenance wing after you." Beau shook his head, half amused. "People don't need a name on a door. They need someone who keeps it open." That line landed like a stone dropped in still water. Riley grew serious. "Something else happened. Something I think you should hear before you read it on how to report." Beau set his mug down. "Go on." She leaned in slightly. "Colonel Everett reviewed your personnel record. The real one. The things they buried." His jaw didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted. "They're clearing your name," she said. "All of it. And recommending a commendation for conduct and leadership." Beau leaned back in his chair. "Leadership," he repeated. "That's a word I used to wear like armor. Now I think it's something you carry in your palms until they blister." "Some calluses are earned," she replied. He was quiet, thoughtful, then said, "I don't want the medal." "I figured. But if it opens a door for someone else who's been forgotten, then maybe it's worth letting them hang it on a wall somewhere." Riley nodded slowly. "You really are impossible to honor." Beau smiled. "Good. Maybe they'll stop trying and start listening." Later that evening, Beau walked through the base quietly, like he always had. But now, soldiers nodded. Some tipped their caps. One young sergeant simply placed a hand over his heart as Beau passed. No salute. Just thanks. Outside the barracks, an older groundskeeper waved him over. "You McAllister?" the man asked, his voice cracked with years. Beau nodded. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, folded newspaper clipping. It was yellowed with time. A photo of a soldier in full gear. A headline: "Operation Fallen Breath. Casualties high. Details classified." "My boy served under that mission," the man said quietly. "Came home changed. Said the only reason he made it back was because someone carried him half a mile through enemy fire. But he never knew the man's name." He looked at Beau. "I think it was you." Beau didn't speak. He just looked at the photo, and after a long moment, gently folded it back. "It wasn't about being seen," he said. "It was about not leaving anyone behind." The man nodded, eyes misting. "You didn't," he said. Then he walked away. At dusk, Riley found Beau standing at the flagpole again. Same place where weeks earlier he'd fixed the rigging while being ridiculed. Same place where Voss had stared at the ground, no answers left to offer. The wind tugged at the rope now, making it sing. She stood beside him, hands in her pockets. "I heard they're rewriting the leadership curriculum," she said. Beau raised an eyebrow. "They're adding a module called Ethics in Silence, inspired by a janitor who reminded a base what humility looks like." He chuckled. "Next thing you know, I'll be teaching etiquette classes." She smiled. "You'd be good at it. You speak like a man who spent years listening." He was quiet. Then, turning to her, he said, "Riley, why'd you keep standing up for me when no one else did?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because you reminded me of my father. He was strong, but never loud. Everyone thought he was just a mechanic, until one day a general called him the quiet engine that kept the whole base running." She looked at Beau. "You carry that same kind of gravity, the kind that doesn't demand a room's attention, but earns it. Beau's voice dropped to a whisper. Truth doesn't need a podium, just a place to stand. They stood together in silence as the flag caught the wind and rose, slow and sure, into the darkening sky. Inside the legacy wall room, someone had added one final note that day. It was written on a napkin, barely legible, taped right in the center. Truth has no rank, only weight. No one knew who wrote it, but everyone knew who had inspired it. And as the base lights flickered on one by one, casting golden reflections across walls once shadowed by pride and pretense, the legacy of a janitor, once invisible, now glowed in quiet permanence. The frost came overnight, not the kind that stung the skin, but the kind that painted the windows with soft veins of white, quiet, creeping beauty. The kind that made soldiers tuck their collars high and walk a little closer to warmth. At sunrise, Beau stood on his porch, a mug in hand, and the cold clinging to his breath. Inside, the sound of a child's laughter filtered through the window. He turned his head and listened, not just with his ears, but with the part of himself that still didn't quite believe he deserved to hear that sound again. Lila, his daughter, 7 years old, bright-eyed, wild-hearted, the last piece of Claire still living in the world, and the only reason he'd ever come back from the dark. "Daddy," she called from inside, voice muffled through the glass. "The pancake looks like a snowman." Beau smiled softly and whispered to the wind, "She gets that from you." Later that morning, Riley pulled into the gravel driveway in her old pickup. She stepped out, shivering beneath her olive-field jacket, a paper bag in hand, and the air thick with something more than cold. Nervousness. She hadn't been here before. Beau's house wasn't on base, but tucked near the woods, where trees outnumbered people, and silence came naturally. A perfect place for someone who wanted to be forgotten, or forgiven. Beau opened the front door before she knocked. "You bring coffee or a reason?" he asked. She held up the bag. "Pumpkin muffins, and curiosity." He stepped aside, smiling. "Then you may enter." Inside was modest, warm, lived in. A wood-burning stove glowed in the corner. A small art easel leaned near the window, covered in crayon storms and smiling suns. On the wall above the fireplace, a single photo of Claire, holding baby Lila, both glowing like sunlight. Riley paused there. "She was beautiful," she said softly. Beau followed her gaze. "She saw through me. Didn't matter how many medals they pinned. She could always tell when I was pretending to be whole. That's what love does," Riley murmured. Before he could reply, a small blur bounded into the room. Lila, blonde curls bouncing, socks mismatched, eyes wide with curiosity. She stopped when she saw Riley, then leaned close to Beau's side and whispered, loud enough for Riley to hear, "Is that the soldier lady you told me about?" Beau grinned. "The very one." Lila's eyes narrowed in mock suspicion. "Does she like pancakes?" Riley crouched and answered seriously, "Only when they look like snowmen." That was enough. Lila smiled like the sun rising. "You can stay." They sat around the small kitchen table, sharing muffins and stories, the wood stove crackling like background music. Lila chatted endlessly about school, her favorite tree, and how she'd once tried to catch snowflakes with a spoon. Beau listened with the kind of patience only a man who'd nearly lost everything could carry. Riley watched him, not just as a father, but as something deeper. A man who had once been trained to end lives, now carefully braiding his daughter's hair between bites of breakfast. It was the quiet heroism people rarely wrote about, and the kind that changed everything. Later, after Lila curled up for a nap with a stuffed raccoon named Sergeant Pickles, Riley and Bo stepped onto the porch. The wind had calmed. The frost was melting under a soft sun. "She's remarkable," Riley said. "She's Claire with more questions," Bo replied. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Riley turned to him. "Why me?" He looked at her. "Why did you let me in?" she asked, eyes steady. "You kept everyone else at a distance. Voss, the command, even the others who tried to help. But not me. Why?" Bo didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because when I was drowning in silence, you didn't try to shout over it. You just sat beside me, in it." Her breath caught. "And because," he added, quieter now, "when the world tried to define me by what I used to be, you asked who I chose to become." Riley's eyes glistened. "You changed me, Bo." "No," he said. "You reminded me that we're still allowed to live after the war ends. Still allowed to love. Still allowed to laugh." He took her hand, not boldly, not possessively, but with quiet reverence, like she was something sacred. "I never thought I'd have a second chapter," he said. "But if I do, I want you in it." Riley squeezed his hand. "I'm not here to rescue you," she said, voice low and full. "I know. I'm here to walk beside you, wherever that leads." Bo nodded. "Then let's walk slow," he whispered, "so we don't miss a thing." And behind them, through the thin wooden walls of that little house, Lila stirred in her sleep, wrapped in blankets, safety, and the quiet miracle of two broken adults choosing to heal in front of her. One honest day at a time, the gym was quiet again. Days had passed since the fight, since Bo Callahan, the janitor with a mop and a quiet past, stepped into the ring and silenced not just fists, but a culture of arrogance. Word had traveled fast. Too fast, maybe. The footage, though not meant to be filmed, had somehow leaked online. Military blogs, veteran forums, and martial arts communities were all buzzing with the same disbelief. A janitor outclassed the war hero. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the bar. Bo wanted none of it. He didn't show up at the gym again. He didn't check the forums or answer the calls. He went back to the base janitor's closet, wiped down lockers, swept the same hallways. The world could argue over belts and honor. He had a daughter to pick up from art class. But change has a way of walking in, even if you don't answer the door. It was a Thursday. Gray sky. Wind sharp enough to make even the soldiers jog to shelter. Bo had just finished replacing the fluorescent lights in the base canteen when a young cadet walked up to him, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Sure," the cadet said awkwardly, shifting on his boots. "This was left for you at command. They said, it's from Colonel Lawson, personally." Bo wiped his hands and took the package without a word. He opened it slowly. Inside, a black belt. Folded, no certificates, no fanfare. Just a note. For the man who proved that silence can be louder than applause. RL. He stared at it for a long while, and then, without expression, tucked the belt gently back into the package. He left it in the staff lounge, right on top of the old piano, where no one played anymore. That night, Riley found him on the edge of the parade field, sitting on the back of his truck, guitar in hand, strumming something soft and unfinished. She climbed up beside him and didn't speak right away. "Colonel wants you to take over training the new recruits," she finally said. He gave a wry smile. "As a janitor, as a coach." He didn't respond. Riley leaned back on her palms. "Why does it scare you more to be seen than to be ignored?" Bo looked out at the wind sweeping across the flags. Because once they see you, they expect something. And once you give them that, they take it. They don't want to take. They want to learn, she said gently. From someone who lived it. Someone who fought without ego. He looked at her then. And what do you want? She met his eyes. I want to raise my son around a man who teaches by listening, who holds a child's hand with the same strength he once held a blade, who makes scrambled eggs at 6 a.m. and still walks his daughter to school even when the world calls him a hero. Bo swallowed, emotion rising in quiet waves. I'm not perfect, Riley. Thank God, she whispered. Perfect men don't know how to love. The next morning, before sunrise, the gym lights flickered on. A new class of recruits stood lined up, nervous, whispering about the man they'd only heard rumors of. They expected someone taller, louder, meaner. But when Bo stepped onto the mat, wearing grey sweats, not a GI, they all fell silent. He didn't speak at first, just looked them over. And then, calmly, he said, Your uniform doesn't make you dangerous. Your scars don't make you tough. And your belt doesn't make you right. He paused, let it settle. Honor is what you do when no one's watching. Discipline is how you treat someone who can't hit back. And strength. He pointed to his chest. That's here, not in your fists, not in your rank. Here. The recruits didn't blink. Bo nodded once. Let's begin. A week later, the gym hosted its graduation match. Families filled the bleachers. Lila sat on Riley's lap, her hair braided with little red ribbons. Bo stood at the edge of the mat, not fighting, just watching, just present. The final match ended in respectful silence. No cheering, just two sweaty, exhausted recruits bowing to each other, and in the crowd, someone started a slow clap, then another. Then the room stood. Not for the recruits, but for the man in the grey hoodie, mop still drying in the corner. Bo Callahan didn't bow. He didn't raise his hand. He just placed one palm over his heart and looked at his daughter. Lila smiled, wide and proud, and whispered to Riley, He doesn't need a belt. He already won. That night, in the stillness of his home, Bo hung a new frame above the fireplace. Inside, it wasn't a black belt. It was Lila's crayon drawing. A man with messy hair, big hands, and a little girl holding his finger. Below it, in her scribbled handwriting, My daddy, strongest man on earth. He stood there for a long time, then turned to Riley, who stood in the doorway holding 2 mugs of cocoa. She smiled. Home looks good on you. Bo took the mug, his voice low and warm. So does forever. And as snow began to fall outside, covering the world in silence again, the house was filled with the only sound that truly mattered. Laughter. Soft. Human. Whole. The kind of sound that never needed a belt to be heard. We'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Whether you're tuning in from a small town, a quiet porch, or somewhere far across the globe, your presence here means more than you know. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of courage, of kindness, or of someone you used to be, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories that speak to the heart, the kind that stay with you long after the screen fades, and from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We're honored to be part of your day. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love.